Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us to discuss the draft 2020 budget and grid management charge. My name is Isabella Nicosia from ISO Stakeholder Affairs, and I'll be facilitating the web conference today. I'm also joined by a few other ISO representatives, so I'll have them introduce themselves starting to my left.
Hello, my name is April Gordon.
Doreen Fender.
Thomas Sutliff.
Ryan Segazio.
Jordan Pinyuf.
Jan Cogdell.
Don Trethewey.
Dennis Estrada.
Jody DeMathis.
Kim Leon.
Today's call is being recorded, and the video file will be posted on the initiative webpage for a limited time. The recording is for informational and convenience purposes only, and any related transcriptions should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. We will be taking questions throughout the call today, so if you have a question, you can enter the question queue at any time by pressing #2. I'd just like to remind everyone to please start by introducing themselves before asking a question. This slide just shows where we are in the process. So right now is the 2020 budget stakeholder call for November. Then we will present the final draft 2020 budget to the board for decision in December. And then following that, we will post the rates at the end of December, and then the rates will be effective on January 1st, 2020. So with that, I will hand it over to Ryan.
Well, good morning, everybody. I don't have a list of who's on the call, but I presume we have some new customers, whether it's from RC or from the EIM entities. So anyway, welcome to the second and final budget stakeholder call. I'll just kind of summarize that we have another, I think it's a very good story. The diversified revenue streams that we continue to develop are leading to a lower overall net revenue requirement. As this first slide shows, and you'll see here shortly, but the net revenue requirement is down to $186.8 million. That's the lowest revenue requirement since 2006, and so remains still very stable over those 13, 14 years now. There is some increase in the O&M budget, which is the bulk of the revenue requirement. That's it'll increase by about $6 million due to some of the labor compensation increases, et cetera. That increase, though, is being offset by the diversified revenue streams, predominantly from the new RC revenue and EIM revenue. You'll see that here shortly, but that is lowering the overall GMC revenue requirement to beneath $187 million. So without stealing any more of April's thunder, I'll turn it over to April.
Thanks, Ryan. This slide in front of you goes over the different components that make up our GMC revenue requirements. As Ryan mentioned, the O&M budget makes up the majority of the revenue requirement, and what you have in front of you is a comparison against the 2019 budget. We are seeing about a 6% increase. The next component of the revenue requirement is the debt service. That remains flat going into 2020. And the cash-funded capital is going to see a $3 million increase over 2019's budget. And other costs and revenues, this is where we're going to see a dramatic increase. Our revenues are going to increase by about $16.5 million. Our operating cost reserve adjustment is going to see a slight decrease of $800,000, and we'll go more into that later on in the slides. All told, we're seeing about a $6.7 million decrease in our net GMC revenue requirement. When we look at our transmission volumes estimates going into 2020, we are seeing about a 1.3 terawatt-hour decrease, and that really has to do with more of the decrease of transmission on the lines due to behind the meter. And our pro forma bundled cost per megawatt hour for 2020 is about 78.3 cents per megawatt hour. And that really is not a rate that any one person or one customer pays. That's just intended to give you an idea if a customer paid on both sides of the supply and demand for all of the services, this is what they could estimate to be paying. The slide in front of you shows our stability in the revenue requirement going back to 2006. As Ryan mentioned, the 2020 revenue requirement is the lowest since 2006. And we are maintaining a straight stability over the years, and as well as staying within our $202 million revenue requirement cap. The next couple of slides will go into deeper dive of each of the components that make up the revenue requirement. Kicking it off would be the O&M budget. The O&M budget is broken down into 6 major expense categories. The largest component of the O&M budget is the salaries and benefits line, and that makes up roughly about 75% of the O&M budget. We are seeing an increase of $4.4 million going into 2020. Our occupancy costs and equipment lease will remain the same. Our contract staff will actually increase slightly by $700,000, and that really has to do with bringing in-house support to maintain our tools. Our outsource and contract expense category is also going to see an increase at $900,000, and that is to bring on additional tools to support efforts such as RC. Training and travel and other costs will see a slight uptick of about $100,000, and that's in anticipation of kicking off another stakeholder symposium in 2020. All told, we're seeing about $195 million on the 2020 O&M budget, which roughly is $6 million over 2019, and that's about a 3.2% increase. The next slide goes over our debt service. The debt service is what we took out to fund our Folsom building. The bond principal outstanding going into 2020 will be $163.4 million. That includes a 13.5 portion for principal and interest, and the 16.9 cost. Let me back up a little bit. The cost going into 2020 will be 16.9, and that's a breakdown of 13.5 million for principal and interest, and 3.4 for our required reserve. The bonds will be callable in February of 2023, but will be standing until 2039. Our 2020 capital project budget is going to be $28 million. Of that amount, we're proposing to cap our project spend at $22 million, which would allow us to put a $6 million deposit into our long-term reserves, which will allow us to go ahead and maintain that stability in our revenue requirement for years out. A list of our proposed budgets is contained in the budget book, and that will be finalized going into 2020. Our other costs and revenues for 2020, our proposed budget is $40.4 million. That is a $16.5 million increase, and the major components for this one are RC. Our funding requirement for RC is coming in at $18.5 million, and that represents 9% of our total revenue requirement. Our energy and balance charges are actually increasing by $700,000, and that's due to additional participants coming online in 2020, those being Salt River Project and Seattle City Light. Our forecasting fees are going to see about a $200,000 increase. Our interest earnings are projected to come in around $600,000 higher as well. And our HANA fees are new to 2020. And that's about a $900,000 revenue item. All told, we're projecting our revenue to be $40.4 million for 2020, which is an increase of $16.5 million. The last component of the revenue requirement is our operating cost reserve adjustment. And this is the mechanism in which we essentially make ourselves whole with our stakeholders, meaning that any year that we over-collect in our GMC revenue or under-collect and or over-collect or underspend in our O&M budget, that difference goes back to our stakeholders. The operating cost reserve adjustment for 2020 is based off of our ending findings for 2018. All told, we're looking at about a $12.7 million credit, which reduces our revenue requirement going into 2020. And that's about an $800,000 decrease from the 2019 operating cost reserve adjustment. The slide in front of you is a projection of our rates going into 2020. With the decreased revenue requirement, we're projecting that each of the rates will actually decrease as well. The new to the 2020 lineup is going to be our RC service rate, which we are projecting to be about 2.78 cents per megawatt hour. All of the remaining fixed fees will be the same. And the slide in front of you goes over a comparison for the RC rates against the peak RC. And we're using the last true operating budget for peak RC for this comparison to make it more of an apples-to-apples comparison. The funding requirement for the California ISO RC West going into 2020 is projected to be $18.5 million, compared to peak RC's $44.6. This is roughly a 59% savings over peak RC's funding requirement. With the reduction in the funding requirement, the California ISO's rate is projected to be 2.78 cents per megawatt hour, compared to peak's last RC rate of 5.58 cents per megawatt hour. That's a 50% savings over that rate. In addition to the lower funding requirement and the lower rates, our internal stakeholders are also seeing a $10.5 million savings in the GMC revenue requirement, which means that we're able to offer that savings throughout our rates as well. This is the last slide of the presentation. Please let us know if you have any questions. Oh, sorry, one more slide.
So just quickly, I'm going to run through some key calendar dates and next steps. So right now we are finalizing the internal budgeting process. We will be accepting stakeholder comments on the materials that we presented today up until November 27th, and you can submit those to initiativecomments@CAISO.com. We will then post responses to comments and meeting minutes on the ISO website on December 4th. And then we will take the GMC revenue requirement to the board for decision on December 18th and 19th, and then post the 2020 rates and GMC revenue requirement documentation to the website on December 31st. So are there any questions? Again, you can enter the queue by pressing #2. And Michelle, will you let us know if anybody enters the queue?
And we do have a question in the queue.
Okay, go ahead.
Caller, your line is unmuted. You may ask your question.
Hello, this is Lauren Perkins of Duncan Weinberg for Modesto Irrigation District and the City of Santa Clara. I have a couple questions going back to your capital project slide. My first general question is CAISO's proposing or projecting an increase of $3 million for cash-funded capital, and I'm wondering what is the reason for the increase?
Sure, this is April Gordon. So with the additional operating cost reserve adjustment credit and the additional revenues, we felt it was an appropriate time to invest more in our capital reserves. By doing so, we're able to stable out our revenue requirement in future years, meaning if we didn't actually do this now, we would be increasing the amount to invest into that reserve in future revenue requirements. By doing it this way, we're able to stabilize that effect now versus later.
Thank you. My other couple questions are with regard to particular proposed projects for 2020 that appear on pages 43 to 46 of the preliminary budget book. My first question is on page 43 of the budget book, EDAM is listed in the medium category, and I'm wondering how CAISO arrived at this conclusion.
Hi, this is Janet Morris with the Project Management Office, and we are still, from an implementation perspective, waiting for the final scope, and just comparing it against prior projects, we feel it's probably going to be able to leverage a lot of our existing systems, but as we learn more about the scope and do a full impact assessment, we'll be able to adjust the size if needed.
Thank you. My next question I'm wondering if implementation of the new TAC rate design is in the 2020 budget. Is this what appears as the transmission access charge billing project on page 44?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure. What do you mean by the PAC billing design?
Does that project cover the new TAC rate design that was in the tax structure enhancements initiative?
Okay, so there was at one point in time a TAC restructuring initiative, policy initiative, that I think has been deferred a bit, and so from an implementation perspective, we again don't have final scope of that project defined yet, and so once we have a final scope, we could report more about what's included, and at this point we're just projecting and forecasting these projects.
Okay, one follow-up question to that. I'm wondering what the transmission access charge billing project on page 44 covers.
Again, this was an item that was in our policy roadmap and has since been deferred, and so we're continuing to carry it on our project list. But the scope hasn't yet come to fruition through that stakeholder process.
This is Don Trethewey. The key is we want to make sure that that design, while it's completed, from a policy standpoint, is consistent with the transmission approach for the EDAM. So once we've made that determination, then we would go forward with the project.
Okay, so just to clarify, I want to make sure that the transmission access charge billing project, that's the same as the tax structure enhancements that's on hold?
Yes, we don't have two separate efforts that are addressing that topic, so as far as we can understand at this point, those would be the same.
Thank you.
So maybe that we've had some changes in naming along the way that have created some confusion, and we'll check that and make sure that our naming is consistent.
Any other questions?
There are no additional questions in the queue.
Okay. Thank you all for joining us today. That concludes today's call. April, did you have anything else to add before we conclude?
No, thank you for your time.
Okay. Have a great day.
That concludes this conference. Thank you for using AT&T Event Conferencing Enhanced. You may now disconnect.